Fan became homeless and addicted to drugs.
And at this point, her toes had fallen off,
saying that the police should give him a break because his friend had just died. When police asked who his friend was, he responded Taylor Gruwell. She fell off a building.
Today we're going to cover the highly requested murder case, the Hello Kitty case. So this case took place in Hong Kong in 1999. A little background on the victim. Fan Men-yi was abandoned as a child, resulting her being raised in an orphanage. When she turned 15, she was told by her orphanage that she had to leave due to their age restriction. With nowhere and no one to turn to, Fan became homeless and addicted to drugs. She was forced into prostitution until the age of 21 when she began working at a brothel. Fan eventually married one of her clients, a fellow drug addict, and in 1998 she gave birth to their son. No surprise, Fan's husband was abusive and the two could be heard fighting at all hours of the night. To secure a better life for herself and her son, Fan took a job as a hostess at a nightclub in the red light district. Go to part 2! This is part 2 of the Hello Kitty murder case. In 1997, Fan met 34-year-old Chen Man-luk, socialite and gang member at her nightclub. He was a pimp and a drug dealer, and they both got along with each other, initially. Even though Fan had a stable job, she was still struggling for money and overcoming her drug addiction. So this is where the details of the fatal night gets a little murky. One night at the nightclub, Chen dropped his wallet and Fan picked it up. It had $4,000 or $500 in the wallet. Fan, desperate for cash, thinking Chen wouldn't notice, kept the money. And this is where it all goes to hell. Chen enlisted 2 of his gang members to kidnap Fan, forced her into prostitution so she can pay back the stolen cash plus interest. Chen decided prostitution wasn't enough, started torturing her. Go to part 3. This is part 3 of the Hello Kitty murder case. For the next month, they kept her captive, forced her to eat human feces, sexually assaulted her, and burned her. Eventually, Fan succumbed to her wounds and died overnight. The most alarming twist to this already disturbing case was a 14-year-old girl named Ah Fong had also participated in the torture. Believed to be one of Chan's prostitutes, not only did she involve in the gruesome crime herself, but she would be the one to go to the police. To spare the vile details, we'll skip to the part why this case is known as the Hello Kitty case. The members dismembered Fan, but saved the head. They sewed the skull into an oversized Hello Kitty mermaid doll. The 14-year-old Ah Fong started to see ghosts of Fan. Scared, she went to the police. Shockingly, the members were not convicted of murder, but of manslaughter because the jury believed that death was not their intent. However, they were still sentenced to life in prison with the possibility of parole after 20 years.
Okay, you guys asked, so I delivered. Here is the Kelly Ronahan story. I'm looking at my notes right over here so that I don't mess anything up. So one disclaimer I will put is that people don't really know if she was faking her illness or not. That's what doctors said. However, there's no proof that she was faking it. She might have had this illness, she might have not, and so I just want to put that out. So, Kelly really started posting on social media and gained popularity because she needed weekly blood transfusions for a rare blood disease. So this was back in 2014, and even though she was getting these weekly blood transfusions, her condition was still worsening. She also became part of a blood donor organization, and this motivated more people, especially her followers, to donate. And because of her constant posts and her stories on her social media, she had a lot of supporters and a lot of followers. In 2017, this is where stuff really got serious. She admitted to her fans that she did have an ED and also participated in SH. However, the posts that she was posting of her scars, they looked pretty recent. During this time frame, also, her port became infected, and doctors still couldn't find the reason for that, and this infection led to her getting sepsis. And during this, the test revealed that her hemoglobin count was normal, and so this led to some of her followers believing that she had been faking the illness this whole time. However, Kelly did dispute these allegations and said that the doctors were, against her and they weren't supporting her and they just didn't believe her at all. Now, in 2018, these rumors that Kelly was faking all of these disorders for attention really started to have some momentum, and people really started to believe that she was just faking all of this. And during this, doctors actually even removed her port because they just fully did not believe her and didn't believe she needed the transfusions anymore. The blood transfusions, let me clarify. Now, this is where the leg infection started. So her legs started to have blisters over them, and she compulsively picked them. She begged the doctors to give her painkillers, however, they absolutely just refused to prescribe her medication. The scabs ended up turning into even larger wounds, and she was suffering from seizures and blisters all over her hands as well. Now, that the wounds on her legs were getting so prominent, and doctors really started to be concerned that she wasn't having enough blood circulation. And the photos she posted like daily updates on the condition of her legs, and her legs just kept getting worse and worse and worse. In 2019, it got so bad that she had to have skin grafts to improve the appearance of her legs. And in 2019 was the first time she walked in months. Part 2 will be right after this. Where we left off in the last video is that Kelly, basically, she was getting blisters and sepsis and unknown infections, and where we are right now is that in 2019 she got the skin graft, and then she continued to pick at her legs, which led to her hospitalization. Now, this is where it gets a little weird. Doctors could not diagnose her condition whatsoever. They didn't know where this infection was coming from, how this happened. And the thing they were most puzzled by is that the wounds just refused to heal on her legs, and they didn't know if this was because she was picking at the wounds or if they just didn't heal just in general. And at this point, her toes had fallen off, some of them. And so doctors recommended an amputation for her. And so this infection and this unknown cause for it led to the amputation of both of her legs. Now, what I didn't address in the first video is that Kelly was a ballerina, and she loved ballet, and she did ballet all the time. However, due to her condition, previously stated, her illnesses, she just wasn't able to do it as often. And so some people just believe that it's just not true that she would fake all of this just to end up with her legs amputated, as she loved ballet more than anything in the world. So another reason that people believe that she is faking this, or was faking this, is that she continually picked at her skin, and she posted updates of her legs. However, it seemed like someone was going in and reopening the wounds, and that they weren't just reopening on their own. Another thing to note is that as she was doing these posts about her condition, it seemed to most of the Reddit users and most of the people following the story that she was more excited over how bad it was getting. If you find the Reddit thread, you'll kind of see what I'm talking about. Now, like I said, during this period, many people just did not believe that she had any sort of illnesses and that she was faking this all for attention. It's also highly suspected that she ran fecal matter into the wounds to further create infection, and this is also due to the fact that there were like cultures and there were, I don't know how to explain it, but like blistering that would only show up if fecal matter was injected or put on the open wound. And to back this up, if you look, which I 10 out of 10 do not recommend looking up the images that she daily posted. It's on Reddit and some other sites, but if you look through them, you can see why people believe that she infected herself because of these sores on it. So I know I went through this really fast. I just wanted to get the video out so that people kind of understood what I was talking about and what the story is. If you guys have any questions or want me to expand on anything further, please let me know in the comments down below.
On September 23, 2017, Taylor Gruwell Miller, who was just 26 years old at the time, would plummet to her death from the rooftop of a parking garage. She was only 26 years old and was a mother of 2. Now, right before her death, you can see Taylor here. She looks agitated. She looks annoyed with the person that she's with, like she's trying to pull back and not go with him. That last person to see Taylor alive was Cody Marley. Now, Cody Marley was supposed to be Taylor's friend, but he wouldn't be seen until he was arrested by police on September the 26th. When he was arrested for a DUI. When police pulled up to Cody's vehicle, he was passed out, actually wearing the same clothes that he was seen wearing in the surveillance video the night that Taylor died. And when he woke up, he began crying, saying that the police should give him a break because his friend had just died. When police asked who his friend was, He responded, "Taylor Gruwell, she fell off a building." Only problem was, at that point in time, Taylor Gruwell had not been identified by police yet. After her body had been found on the pavement outside, she was just known as Jane Doe. She would have to be identified by her fingerprints in order to alert her family, who weren't even aware that she had passed by this point in time. So how did Cody know that his friend had died? And why at the time of his arrest was he covered in bruises? At first, police had these questions too, asking Cody about his injuries, to which he shut down. But even more odd, in Cody's statement to police about what happened on September 23rd, the day that Taylor had fallen from the building, he said he didn't know what happened to Taylor and he didn't know where she was, saying that he had actually circled the block a few times trying to find her that evening, which completely contradicted the statement he gave when he was arrested for the DUI, saying that his friend Taylor Gruwell had just passed away by falling off of a building. Dallas Police Department initially labeling him a suspect, follow-up to murder. However, Cody Marley would never be an official suspect in this case, not even a person of interest. Even with all this evidence, Taylor's death has remained undetermined, not suspicious. But as Max and I discussed this week on Innocent Till Tipsy, her autopsy report oddly leaves out a lot of notes that the hospital made about Taylor's injuries to her body. And because Taylor's cause of death still remains undetermined almost 5 years later, Taylor's family still needs our help putting the pieces together to find out what happened to their daughter that evening. So please make sure you check out this week's episode of Innocent Till Tipsy. You literally could be the piece of the puzzle that solves this case.
This may be one of the most important episodes that we have ever featured on Innocent Till Tipsy, because you guys could possibly solve this case. So please listen to this episode in full and share the hell out of it. As I always say on my TikToks, you never know who you may know that may know something about this case. Even on your socials, share Taylor's story everywhere you can scream it.
Friends of the Canadian wrestler Chris Benoit say that he would be the last person you would ever suspect to murder his family. But on June 25th, 2007, the bodies of Chris, his wife Nancy, and their son Daniel were found in their Fayetteville, Georgia home. That night, Chris had been scheduled to perform on WWE Raw in Corpus Christi, Texas. Vince McMahon decided to cancel the Raw performance that night and instead host a 3-hour memorial for Chris. This would be the last time the company as a whole would mention the name of Chris Benoit, as just 40 minutes before the end of the live broadcast, it would be announced to the public that the Benoit family murders were now being investigated as a murder blank. Vince McMahon releasing this statement about the tragedy.
On a recent edition of Raw, the WWE presented a special tribute show recognizing the career of Chris Benoit. However, the facts of this horrific tragedy involving Chris Benoit were not known at the time. Therefore, other than my comments, there will be no mention of Mr. Benoit's name in this program. On the contrary, this show is dedicated to everyone who has been affected by this terrible incident. This marks the first step of the healing process whereby WWE performers will now do what they do better than anyone else in the world: entertain you.
And since then, the WWE has never mentioned Chris Benoit's name again, but oddly enough, they've also never mentioned Nancy Benoit's name, which is weird to me considering everything that Nancy Benoit did for women in wrestling. Nancy was born Nancy Toffoloni in Boston, Massachusetts. She had graduated from DeLand High School in Florida and married her high school sweetheart and was working for an insurance company when she went to her first wrestling show. Nancy reportedly wasn't even into wrestling, however, her first husband took her there, and of course, she was nabbed up right away because she's drop-dead gorgeous. She was soon featured on the cover of Wrestling All-Stars magazine, which is how she caught the attention of her future husband, Kevin Sullivan. Now, during the course of their marriage, the couple would transfer between companies, which was normal for wrestlers, but Nancy's character would also change. Originally, she was known as Fallen Angel, accompanying Kevin Sullivan and his entourage into the ring. But after her and Kevin joined the WCW, they thought up a new character. Nancy posing as a crazy Rick Steiner fan in the crowd until Rick Steiner finally took her out on a date, according to their storyline. And that was how Nancy's iconic character of Woman was born. And Nancy was able to parlay her stage persona into a valet, a manager for wrestlers. In her return to the WCW, she would end up managing Ric Flair and the Four Horsemen. One of those horsemen was her future husband, Chris Benoit. Nancy's husband, Kevin Sullivan, at the time was actually a writer for WCW. And it would later become the joke of the wrestling industry that Kevin Sullivan booked and wrote his own divorce, after he wrote out the storyline of Nancy leaving him for the Canadian Crippler. Kevin Sullivan would become the joke of the wrestling industry after he wrote a storyline for the WCW where his wife Nancy would leave him for the Canadian crippler Chris Benoit. Kevin was an old school wrestler, so he believed they really had to act out these parts, Nancy even traveling everywhere with Chris during that point in time. And soon, life imitated art, and Nancy really did leave her husband for Chris. But not before Kevin actually scripted his own retirement match, which was actually supposed to be against Chris, which actually turned into a real fight between the two wrestlers that even continued after the match was over backstage. Now, Chris Benoit was actually born in Montreal, Canada, and he became fascinated with wrestling after his father took him to Stampede Wrestling in Calgary, Alberta, where Chris became fascinated with the Dynamite Kid named Thomas Billington, along with Billington's signature move, the diving headbutt, something Chris would adopt himself once he became a wrestler. And we're going to come back to this signature move because it is now believed that over his career, Chris Benoit suffered over 300 concussions. After years of taking steel chairs to the face and moves like this, Chris Benoit's brain at the time of his death looked like an 85-year-old Alzheimer's patient. Many believing that the degenerative brain disorder CTE was truly what led Chris Benoit to murder his family. However, there's many theories as to why this tragedy happened. For instance, Chris was very small in stature to become a wrestler, and so he started using steroids. They were very commonplace at the time, most wrestlers used them. And during this time, the effects of long-term steroid use wasn't really known. And sadly, Chris started them so young. Now we know that they stunt skeletal size, so Chris may have actually one day been big enough to become a wrestler on his own. We won't know that. But Chris also started out his wrestling career at the infamous Hart family dungeon, which was seen as very controversial later on. This training was later seen as very sadistic and abusive to the wrestlers that were involved in it. And not to mention Chris's idol, Thomas Billington, who would later become his mentor in wrestling, would gladly tell the public later in life that he at one point in time threatened his wife with a blank. That same wife would later say in an interview that she had at one point in time considered blanking herself and her children in order to get away from Thomas. And Chris idolized him, so I just want to paint a picture of the world surrounding Chris Benoit. Now, at the beginning of his career, Chris actually went overseas to Japan to join the NJPW, which was also known to be associated with the Yakuza. And in a later interview, according to Kevin Sullivan, could be quite abusive training again in and of itself. But it would also be while he was overseas where he met his dear friend, Eddie Guerrero. Their friendship beginning in 1993 after Benoit kicked Guerrero so hard in the face that he knocked him out. The two of them were both very disciplined athletes and wrestlers, and would both later be reunited stateside when they joined the WCW, where Chris met his future wife, Nancy. But soon the two of them would move from the WCW to the WWF, I'm sorry for all the acronyms, which was later known as the WWE. After a lawsuit from the World Wildlife Fund, you can't make this stuff up. But when Eddie suddenly died, Chris was no longer himself. According to his friends and family, it wouldn't be until his best friend Eddie Guerrero passed that Chris Benoit would start not acting at all like himself. Now, by that point in time, Chris had made a name for himself in the wrestling industry, winning the World Heavyweight Championship at WrestleMania 20, where he called his best friend on stage. They kind of had this Adrian-type moment. After he forced Triple H to actually tap out after using his signature move, the crossface crippler. But it was a little over a year later when Eddie Guerrero suddenly passed away at the age of 38. And according to USA Today, professional wrestlers are actually 20 times more likely to die by the age of 45 than professional football players are. Because while the scripts aren't real, the injuries that they can withstand certainly are. And Eddie and Chris were about the same age. So it wasn't a matter of what if, it was more of a matter of when will my number come up. And Chris and Nancy, who were now married and had their own child together, were seeming to lose friends almost every week. And close friend of Chris Benoit, Chris Jericho, actually said that there wasn't a time in the last part of their lives where this family wasn't in constant grieving over friends they were losing because of the industry they were in. So after Eddie passed, Chris went into bouts of paranoia where he wouldn't drive the same way to the airport or to the gym. He got dogs for house security. Now, mind you, this could all be normal things. Chris at that point in time was very recognizable and fans weren't keeping a polite distance. But now it's something that family looks back on and says that might have been a red flag. It was also during this time that Eddie's wife would find Chris in her own bed, sobbing on Eddie's side of the bed. And reportedly, Chris and Nancy's marriage was suffering. Back in 2003, Nancy had actually filed for divorce and a restraining order, citing their marriage as irrevocably broken and cruel treatment. Wrestler and neighbor to the couple, Johnny Grunge, who would actually just die a few years later very suddenly, and Nancy's sister Sandra actually helped the couple repair their marriage, Nancy soon dropping the divorce and the restraining order. But this didn't end the contention in the household. Nancy would hide and throw away Chris's blanks. She was also convinced he was having an affair, which was reportedly something that Chris would play into, although reportedly there was no affair going on at the time. And in a text to Chris before her death, Nancy wrote, "I will not accept the steroid-induced roller coaster ride of emotional abuse." And after Chris responded to her that he was clean, Nancy said, "We both know that the WWE's wellness plan is a joke, Chris." Nancy reportedly was also extremely worried about Chris's behavior since his friend Eddie had died. Her sister Sandra even getting Chris a journal to write to his friend Eddie and to try to help him cope with his grief. But Chris's behavior just didn't seem to change. And reportedly, right before the Benoit family murders, Chris took out another life insurance policy on himself. Chris had actually been married before Nancy and had 2 children in that marriage. His first wife and 2 children were his beneficiaries in this life insurance policy. This life insurance policy has always made me wonder how premeditated these murders were, especially since Nancy fought to be put on it. The last person to see Chris Benoit before the Benoit family murders was his doctor, Phil Aston. I use doctor as a loose term because Phil just handed out prescription drugs like they were candy. I'm not even saying that allegedly. There'd be an entire investigation launched into Phil. And just a couple days before the Benoit family murders, Chris's old tag team partner Biff Wellington would die of a heart attack. Now, Biff's death being so close to the Benoit family murders would leave a lot of fans wondering what exactly happened, and it would lead to a lot of conspiracy theories. In fact, there are so many conspiracy theories about the Benoit family murders, I am not going to be able to touch on them all. I'm only going to be able to touch really on one. And I think this has to do with a lot of things. One, whenever someone does something like this, it's totally unexplainable. And you truly don't want to believe that this could have happened from someone that you care about or trust or thought you knew. But number 2, because I feel like the GBI kept so much secret from the public, and honestly, rightly so. For instance, Chris did leave a blank note in one of the Bibles that he would leave by the bodies, which again, that doesn't make sense because the Benoit family was not religious, which also led into conspiracy theories. But things like that being kept secret really kept the conspiracy theories going, and not to mention there's a Wikipedia page update, which we'll get into the next part. I just think if any of these conspiracy theories had even the hint of truth, Nancy's family, and especially Chris's family, would be trying to unearth that truth. But all of their friends and family say that unfortunately, they believe that Chris did this. But first, let's talk about what the Georgia Bureau of Investigations believed happened to the Benoit family in June of 2007. They believe that the murders happened over a 3-day period between June 22nd to the 24th. Nancy is believed to have been killed first on Friday night, and her sister Sandra wants the public to know her body was brutalized, and she fought for her life. Both of her hands and her feet were duct taped. Her body was found in a pool of her own blood, a TV cord wrapped around her neck. Investigators believe that a knee was shoved into her back while she was strangled with the cord. They then believe that Daniel, who was only 7 at the time, was killed on Saturday. Daniel's cause of death was also asphyxia. The investigators at the time believed that Chris used his signature wrestling move, the crossface crippler, against his own son. And at some point on Sunday, after Googling how to strangle himself, Chris went downstairs to their home gym with a half a bottle of wine and a towel around his neck. He then adjusted his own weight machine to 240 pounds, just 20 pounds more than his own body weight. And using the cord from the weight machine, he blanked himself. Now, like with most of these cases, we will never fully know what went on inside the Benoit family home during that weekend. And in the wake of the Benoit family murders, the WWE would make a few decisions that would become controversial later on. Many saw this 3-hour memorial as exploitative of Chris's friends, them having immediately to get on live TV and sob in front of the world about their friend dying, not knowing until 40 minutes before the show's close that this was actually being investigated as a blank. Now, like I said in the last part, there are many conspiracy theories when it comes to the Benoit family murders, which also weren't helped by the very controversial things that the WWE did immediately after the murders. In order to explain the illegal steroids found in Chris's house, the WWE blamed it on his 7-year-old son, making a public statement that the steroids found in his home were not only legal, but were there to treat Daniel, who, according to them, suffered from Fragile X syndrome. Nancy's sister Sandra was horrified that the WWE made up that Daniel had an illness in order to blame illegal steroids found in the house on a 7-year-old instead of taking responsibility. However, since Chris's death, there has been a federal investigation into the WWE for steroid use. And reportedly, although I've heard some rumors about designer steroids, they are taking that testing seriously now. Chris is also the reason there are no more headshots in the WWE, or at least they try not to have headshots, because after his death, and in order to try to explain things, Chris's father, Michael, set his brain off to be studied. And it was found that Chris suffered from a degenerative brain disorder because of all the injuries that he withstood during his time in wrestling. His brain at the age of 40 looked like an 85-year-old's brain with Alzheimer's. As many who knew him have said, Chris was not himself at the time of his death. Now, I did want to touch on one conspiracy theory. The Wikipedia page for Chris Benoit was actually changed 14 hours before the bodies were found. It was updated saying that the reason Chris had missed one of his shows that week was due to the death of his wife, Nancy. When the IP address was checked of the user that changed this information on his wiki page, it was found that it came from Connecticut, which is where the WWE headquarters are based out of. This has led a lot of conspiracy theorists to believe that the WWE was in on murdering both Chris and his family. However, the FBI investigated this and they found out that it was a fan with severely bad timing. The only thing is that they never have identified this fan. This fan even wrote out an anonymous apology. Like, this did not help the conspiracy theorists at all. The fan stating in his apology that there'd been speculation already that something was severely wrong in the Benoit household since Chris never missed a WWE event. I personally believe this is a very sad coincidence. As like I said in the last part, I believe if there was any shred of truth to this, both Nancy's family and Chris's would be on it, trying to get answers for their loved ones. But sadly, it's believed by closest to them that Chris was, in fact, the person that carried out these murders. That statement from Vince McMahon we mentioned in part 1 is the last time the WWE has ever mentioned the name of Chris Benoit, and rightfully so. But what boggles my mind is there has been no mention of Nancy Benoit since 1997. Now, the last time she was seen, she was with WCW, but it was bought by the WWE, and she did so much for women in wrestling, so I'm not sure why her legacy is not remembered. And it should be noted that Chris's son from his first marriage, David Benoit, has actually tried to get a professional wrestling career, but seems to be blacklisted because of his father. It's as though all the victims of Chris's actions have just been being blacklisted from the wrestling industry. For now, we're at the end of another true crime, and there's still something that you can do. Chris's first son, David Benoit, recently shared on his socials the Concussion Legacy Foundation. Their mission is to support athletes, veterans, and anyone who may have suffered from concussions and CTE, hoping one day to end CTE with prevention and research. So if you feel so led to donate, I'll link it in my link tree, which is on my website, linked in my bio. CTE is something that can affect so many people. It's not just for men, women in high-impact sports like volleyball, cheerleading, soccer. Just be careful out there, take care of your head, and make sure you reach out for help if you feel like something could be wrong.